Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And we are very excited to showcase this next guest here on our network, so sit back, strap in, and get ready for a wonderful ride. And on the line with us today, we have C.R.Stobo. We're going to be discussing two of his fantastic books, both so uniquely individual. The first one is called Coronach. That's a poetry book that he's written. And then the second one is called Santa's Dragon. It's a fictional action-packed book, both of which are available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. And guys, I will say that Craig was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best publishers in the business. Sweetspire Literature Management. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, give yourself the best gift you could possibly give and contact Sweetspire. And you can find out more information on them at sweetspireliterature.com. Craig, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you so much for being a guest with us today. How are you?
I'm very well. Very nice to be with you today, Benji, and thanks very much for having me on.
Likewise, man. Listen, it is truly a pleasure, okay? And we're very much looking forward to, not only having two extra books to add to the shelves, but also all the words of wisdom, man, that we're going to be able to receive from you today, Craig. And I know we have so much information to cover, but before we go into the books, let's hold off slightly. Start by telling our listening audience a little bit more about yourself and your background, please.
Well, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm Scottish and I live in Scotland. I was born in Glasgow. I now live in a wee village just in the edge of the southern highlands of Scotland. And I've got an 11-year-old boy, and I've got a very sensible corporate day job involving advising businesses. But when I'm not doing that, I like to scribble down words, which is something that I've always done since I was very small, in various different shapes and forms, and happily now some of them have turned into a couple of books. So that's a very brief overview of my backstory to date.
Beautiful. Well, again, welcome to the show, man. We're looking forward to this. Now, Craig, your first book that you wanted to talk about was your poetry book, Coronach. Tell us a little bit more about it. Give us a brief synopsis first and foremost, please.
Well, Coronach is Scottish Gaelic for a lament, a funeral lament that used to be sung back in the old days when a funeral was taking place. And it's a very specific book. It's a cycle of poems, really, that stemmed from a very difficult period of time in my own life when I lost my wife at a very young age and also my unborn daughter. And it was written over a few years. It really covers the processes of love and loss and grieving as well. And the poems came out as they came out. I kind of needed to write. Often say to people that I find the need to write as much as I need to kind of breathe or drink water. So it was a very natural thing for me to do. And eventually I ended up with a very specific cycle of poems. There was a clear beginning to them and then a very clear end point. I knew which one was the last poem. And then I took a wee while longer to edit them down into the book. And it now, I hope, represents something that is both a testament to them and the experience that I went through. It was certainly very cathartic from that point of view, and hopefully something that might be of use to other people who are perhaps going through similar situations.
Craig, wow. First and foremost, as I said to you on the pre-screening call, I'm just going to reiterate it again. My sincerest apologies for the passing of your wife and your unborn child.
Thank you, Benji.
Craig, next question that I want to follow up with is, as you just simply stated, this was almost a cathartic experience for you, right? You're going through a tough time, and this was a process that you were working through yourself. Now, in addition to doing it for yourself, because it very easily could have just stayed in your own home, you didn't end there. Now, I'm curious, what did you realize while you were writing these poems that made you feel the words you were putting on the page would be beneficial to all that picked it up?
Well, I think it's the recognition that, particularly as you get older in life, that you realise that everybody encounters love and everybody encounters loss. And I guess, as I said, speaking very selfishly and personally, for me, writing the words down was very cathartic, and it's something that I would do anyway. I mean, I've kept a diary for 30 plus years every day, on and off. So to me, it was a very natural thing to do. But going beyond that, there's grief is very specific to everybody in terms of their own circumstances, but equally there is a commonality to the feelings and the processes that people go through. So it was very much written in the spirit that I hoped that by putting it out there, it could also be of help to other people. Even just a recognition that as it's a cycle, and the poems are pretty much in chronological order, you can see that the initial, almost the shock phase of the grieving process, and then gradually more reflective poems come in and more optimism as well. And so there's that element of saying to people that it could be that people are in a very dark place right now, but hopefully by reading the book, they can see that there is always some light that will follow, and it could take a long time, and it does very much depend on everybody's own circumstances, but there's always hope. So I guess it's to try and recognize that commonality of grief, but also to emphasize to people not to give up, and that there's always some hope to be clutched at in the end.
Craig, so much about what you just said I absolutely love. And the only reflection that I'm going to make, because I have to continue to remind myself, like, Benji, this is not about you. Okay, this is about Craig. We have another book to address, and we'll get to that. But the one thing that I want to point out, and I know you're not looking for any compliments, right? So I get that. People, listen, how often is it hard enough for us to just look into the mirror, right? And that proverbial or metaphoric mirror, and look into our own aspects of ourselves, be it flaws, be it adversity, be it things about ourselves or about our past that don't bring us happiness. How often do we neglect focusing on it, right? And really acknowledging it. And I'll be the first to say it here. I know I have, right? I know I've been in that position, and rather than acknowledging it, you try to sweep it under the rug and look the other way. Well, not only is that difficult in and of itself, but then what Craig has done by taking that metaphorical mirror and then translating that into a window of sorts. So now he's showcasing himself in a lot of these very vulnerable moments in his life, and he's showcasing it to the world. I think that is so commendable. And what it takes in terms of the amount of bravery and courage to be able to have established that and put yourself out there and really expose yourself in such a vulnerable state, Craig, I think is so incredible what you did. So thank you very much for that. That's going to be the last thing that I'll say with regards to this book right now, because I could talk to you for hours, man. And listen, it's not about me. Okay. So thank you once again for that. Craig, your next book, Santa's Dragon. Talk to us a little bit more about that and the journey that your characters embark upon.
Well, that's a very different kind of book, and I think that the best way I can describe that is it's very much a kind of a fantasy adventure book. It's a bit of a roller coaster, and with the central message of two young schoolboys who happen to come across a dragon and then get involved in this huge big adventure to try and save Christmas from an evil toy maker who wants to destroy it forever. So it doesn't get if you're a kid, it doesn't get any bigger than that. And it's, as I say, it's much more of a fun book, and it's been one that's been bubbling away for years and years. But eventually, actually not long before the pandemic began, I just started writing it up. I'd kind of outlined it and I started writing it up. And then it kind of became a project to kind of, through the pandemic, I just kept chipping away at it a wee bit every day. And it's amazing the number of words that you can write if you just do a wee bit every day with that regularity. So it was a wee moment of, I suppose, light in what was, again, for all of us, quite a dark and grim and long period. So it helped while away some of the long evenings during the pandemic.
Craig, let's get back into inspiration. Now, specifically with this book, Santa's Dragon, what was your inspiration behind this one?
Well, the inspiration really was, I think it's twofold. I've always loved those sorts of books that take you from the real world, as it were, and land you in another world, and the kind of classic adventures. I have described this book as being it's a bit like Dan Brown or the Da Vinci Code meets Indiana Jones, but set at Christmas and with a dragon. And if you throw all those things together, and hopefully, if I've done it well enough, then it's just that entertainment of almost being lost in this different world that's a bit like our world, but with a kind of slight twist. So it's a kind of alternative, slightly imaginary version of our world. And like I said, it's the sort of book that if you'd handed me that, particularly at Christmas, when I was 10 or 11, I would just have devoured it. So I'm hopeful that if I manage to do it as well as I hope I have, then that's what today's kids will get. And it's a bit of escapist fantasy with goodies and baddies and all the kind of the evil toy maker trying to take over the world and all the big stuff that kids love, and then the big finale at the end.
There you go. I love how you said the big finale at the end. He's not giving anything away, guys. Okay? You know what you have to do.
No spoilers.
No spoilers here today. Amazon, Barnes & Noble are where you have to go. Make sure you're picking up each one of those copies. You're surely not going to be disappointed. Craig, sticking with inspiration, but broadening it out a bit. So we have Coronach, poetry book, very, very real content. Then we have Santa's Dragon, fictional, action-packed narrative. Two completely opposite sides of the spectrum. I'm curious, now I know you said your writing has always been something that you just love to do, right? You just love to put words on the page. Now,
Yep.
Were there particular artists that inspired you, people that inspired you? Where did this love for creative writing come from?
I wish I could take some credit for it, but I think it's just hardwired into me. Going back to the book of poetry, I too was very ill in hospital at the time when everything happened, and I was surrounded by family and friends who kept on asking me, "Is there anything you want or anything you need?" And there really wasn't anything until about the third day after Fiona and Isla had passed away, when I actually asked for a notebook and a pen. Those were the first two things that I asked for, because I always carry, and I think a lot of writers do this, but I always carry a notebook and a pen with me. But just because of the circumstances and because of the way I'd been into hospital myself, I didn't have those with me. So for me, from that point of view, it's almost like having a breath or a drink of water. I need to have those things, so the words needed to come. But in terms of how do I know which words are which? Well, I had a very clear idea when the poems started coming. I can always tell if a poem is a poem, if you know what I mean, because there are different ideas that come, and some of them just clearly reveal themselves to be a poem. Mm-hmm. And some of the poems are good, and some of the poems aren't so good, and some of the poems get finished, and sometimes they don't. And you can usually tell quite quickly which kind is good to be. But this other idea, as I say, had been bubbling away for ages and ages. So again, it's almost like just moving into a different gear to think, right, there's a way to kind of to do this. And I'm very much an outliner or a plotter, as I think we're called, in that you do an outline first of all, and then you write out the book. So there's a clear process, if you like, to each, and it's always very clear to me when an idea comes that it's either going to be a poem or maybe it's an idea for the next book, a kind of longer form narrative, and they take a little bit longer to build up, whereas obviously a poem can be relatively short,
right?
And then you just got to try and decide how to bundle them up. With Coronach, though, it was a very clear cycle of poems that I was in, and I knew I was in, and I also knew when it was finished as well.
Craig, as we start to tie up this fantastic interview, last couple of questions here. What would you say was a highlight for you? Or maybe highlight is the wrong word to use, given the origin stories and really the inspiration behind these narratives. What would you say was something maybe that surprised you? Either about writing the poetry book, the fictional narrative, or just the writing journey itself that maybe you weren't expecting before you began on the journey?
I think with the poems, I was quite surprised at how many of them there were in the end, because the ones that made it into the book, that's not the entirety of all the ones that I wrote, and I didn't quite expect there to be so many. And I think I was always quite zen about the idea that it would take as long as it would take to write the cycle, and I'd kind of know when I was at the end of it. So I think there was a degree of surprised at the number of them. But then it was a case of whittling them down, and the editing's always very different from the writing as well. And then with Santa's Dragon, the other thing, I mean, it's a kind of variation on a theme. I didn't set out to write quite as long a book as I did, but it is what it is, and it ended up being a lot longer. But it's also quite important because it's the setup book for a subsequent series. Again, no spoilers, but it will make sense if people read it. So I think it ended up being the right length and the length it needed to be. But there were a lot of words, maybe more words than I expected. But hopefully, if folk read it, then they'll enjoy it.
Yo, Craig, what a fantastic segue that you've established, because the next question that I wanted to go to was, what's next for you? What's on the horizon? Well, you just hinted towards a potential series for Santa's Dragon. So, of course, without giving too much away, without spoiling anything, so you said that there's at least going to be one more. Is there a potential series of books here? Talk to us about what's upcoming.
Yeah, there will be a series of books, all being well. I've got an outline for, if you like, a complete arc for the series, and the next few books are outlined in quite a bit of detail. So there will be subsequent adventures to come, featuring some of the people who are in the main book as well. But you'll have to read it to find out where they go next.
I love it. 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 Craig, listen, I could think of no better way to close out such a profound interview as this one has been than with one of your poems from Coronach. So please, if you have one readily available, my listening audience, myself, we are all ears.
Sure. As I said, it's a cycle of poems, but I want to close with one of the poems that I think is quite optimistic, and it really just to say to people who may be going through something terrible or something awful at the time. This is just a point of view that I'd like to express to them, to try and say that there is a bit of hope, and just to keep on hanging on in there. This one's called A Temporarily Fixed Point in Time. Wherever there are endless hours of darkness and the dawn becomes the day's false summit, remember the light cannot be lost forever, for the sun always rises. Whenever all you know has frozen over and only a phantom warmth remains, permafrost may blanket your every moment, yet the sun always rises. However the fates have corralled your dreams, or loaded the deck and the gun as well, while life's shadows may look perpetual, still the sun always rises. Whoever is lost or has departed, leaving that never-ending ache in their stead, the one that excavates you till you're empty, know the sun always rises. Whatever has befallen those around you, devoured your time and all you have to give, rendered all you hold exhausted, turned the world into a place of shade. You must cross the scattered debris and carry on so as to live, for each day resets at midnight clear, and the sun always rises.
Craig, I love that, man. I love the...
Thank you very much.
Of course, and I love the repeated image, right, in the sun always rising, right? Because there's always that hopeful silver lining there. No matter how dark things get, tomorrow's a new day, right? Tomorrow's a new day. The sun is rising, and it leads to hope. I absolutely love...
Never give up. Never give in.
Absolutely. Craig, I love that, man. And guys, you know what I love even more? Is listen, we're at the end of the interview now, and we have discussed so much information, yet we've barely scratched the surface somehow, right? I mean, we have two separate books here, completely unique in and of themselves, and we've barely scratched the surface. I'm going to say it once more, even though I know I don't have to. But we're here on the line with C.R.Stobo. We just finished discussing his wonderful books, Coronach, the poetry book, and then Santa's Dragon, the fictional narrative. Make sure to check back into his Amazon and Barnes & Noble pages frequently, because as he stated, there is a series in the works. So there's going to be much more to pick up on the horizon. Do yourself a favor. A fantastic book for you to have on your shelf. A wonderful gift for you to get for someone else's. So head on over there and pick up your copies today. Craig, this has been an absolute pleasure. Truly mean that. Such an honor. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thanks so much for having me, Benji. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Come and be a guest with us on People of Distinction.